Okay, so we've all made it to the end. Well, some of us have made it to the end. So yeah. So the final lecture in the module is on marketing. So it's kind of going to be an introduction to marketing, or some themes around pharmaceutical marketing, or something vaguely related to marketing. I have to admit I've not delivered this lecture before. Someone else has delivered it in previous years. So I was sort of putting this together over the past few weeks, and what struck me was that there are lots of themes in marketing, but there are no real conclusions. So there's no real definitive way to say, yes, this is how you market something. So there's a lot of sort of concepts and theories and themes and models and stuff. So if the lecture seems a little bit nebulous at places, then I think this is what I found by reading books and journals and stuff like that. There's a lot on marketing out there. So there's a lot on marketing online. Some of it is in journals. So there are journals on marketing. There are textbooks on marketing. Lots of textbooks on marketing. Some of you may well have done a course on marketing, a module on marketing last week with Professor Rowson here in ChemEng. And there are also lots of consultancies on marketing online, some of whom have got sort of publications and things that are trying to extract money from you so they can give you advice on marketing. So what I aim to do with this session is just talk around a bit about some of the themes in marketing and some of the theories in marketing. But there won't necessarily be anything massively concrete in this. So it's really just provided to try and stimulate thought of how one can market pharmaceuticals. So as an introduction, we've already said about 3,000 times this week it's a highly regulated industry. And so if we compare marketing of pharmaceuticals to marketing of other things, we are in a much more highly regulated industry. So if we compare it to something like consumer electronics, mobile phones, cars, holidays, flights, furniture, whatever, it's much more highly regulated. So it's just about the most highly regulated industry I can think of. So clearly the regulation is all around production, which we've already seen with GMP this morning. It's around the R&D side with GLP and stuff like that. So all of that comes under very intense scrutiny, and even the distribution and selling the stuff. So the actual route by which the pharmaceutical products go from factory to consumer to patient is highly regulated as well. So clearly, any marketing that occurs is going to have to exist in this framework. In addition to this, there are extremely long development times, as we've seen, so sort of 10, 15 years for a new product, which is a lot longer than most of the products I can think of again. So compared to consumer electronics, I don't know what the lead time for a new mobile phone is, but it's probably about a couple of years, 3 years of development time to give rise to a new electronic product. It's an extremely unpredictable development process. So as we've seen, there's a huge chance of failure, chance of drugs going through the pipeline failing quite readily. So therefore, the marketing has to sort of bear that in mind. Clearly, you can't market something that is only just sort of going through clinical trials because it's very difficult to actually say whether that will be actually used. I mean, it's interesting. Having said that, if you go on the drug companies' websites on the section where it talks about the drug companies' pipeline at the moment, they will have things going through clinical trials, and they'll say what they've got going through clinical trials really as an indicator to their shareholders. Of what's happening, so to persuade people that yes, actually, GSK have got several drugs going through phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials, and it may well say what sector those are in, what sort of disease area. So I suppose you could almost think of that as a form of marketing. It's just a bit of awareness getting out there, saying, oh yes, GSK in 3 years' time will possibly have a drug on the market. But clearly, that's a very sort of guarded statement. It's not like Apple saying we will have the new iPhone ready for you next year, because. I mean, imagine what would happen if the new iPhone didn't actually exist, didn't actually come to fruition because there was something hideously wrong with it, much like what Apple have been experiencing this week with their computers that anyone can log into with a blank password. But there we go. So we've got this highly regulated, highly unpredictable business. There's a huge amount of money involved, potentially incredibly expensive products. There are different financial models worldwide. I mean, back to mobile phones. If you're selling a mobile phone, the mobile phone will be broadly the same, more or less, where you are. There are going to be different languages on it, obviously. There are going to be slight regional variations, but the model for selling the mobile phone will be more or less the same all around the world. You compare that to drugs, and it's going to be completely different in different markets. And then you've got the whole problem of the fact that most things that you market to the consumer. So you market the device to the consumer. So if a mobile phone company wants you to buy the new mobile phone, they will have an advert and they will tell you this is the best mobile phone, buy this. But obviously drug companies don't do that, certainly not in the UK. There are only a couple of markets where prescription drugs are advertised, so US and New Zealand, and we'll talk about that right at the end. Obviously, over-the-counter drug products are marketed in the UK, so things you can buy from Sainsbury's or a pharmacist that you get over-the-counter without prescription can be marketed and can be advertised. So for prescription medicines, how does the marketing exist there? How does GSK market their prescription medicines? Because they can't market it to you as a consumer, as a patient. So they're not going to be saying, you really need to take this new, amazing drug for a disease you didn't even know you had, and here is all the data behind it. So how do they actually get that to the patient? So we'll talk about some of those areas. So in terms of the economics, global pharma industry had revenues of around $967 billion in 2016, and this is a number from Statistica. So if you look online, again, if you look online, you can find numbers about the economics of the pharma industry relatively easily. Breakdowns of those numbers are a little harder to find because there are lots of companies out there who put together reports for the industry. So you can sort of look at you can find a graph that looks a bit like this. So this is the top pharma companies by revenue. So this comes from Statistica and Money Morning Staff Research. So Money Morning is the website from where this is taken. And if you look on newspaper websites, they will have similar sort of data. To actually gain access to any more data than this, though, you would have to go to one of these companies who put these reports together. The reports are then sold to other pharma companies so that sector intelligence can be gained and gathered. So if Novartis wanted to know what Pfizer and Sanofi are doing, their closest competitors, they would buy these reports and they would get a full market breakdown. They'd get breakdown of what's being sold in which markets, what sort of drugs, what class of drugs, what disease area, over-the-counter, prescribed, and so forth. The downside for us is that those reports are incredibly expensive, thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds for a report. So, and this is how these companies make their money. So we don't actually see that level of detail, but we can get the overall numbers. So we can see that, and there are around about 200 multinational global drug companies in the world at the moment. Added to that, there are all the biopharma and the smaller drug companies that we mentioned earlier in the week. So these are the companies who've got a great idea, they've got a great technology, and their business model may well be that eventually they'd like Novartis to buy them and gain their IP, as we spoke about on Monday. So we can see we've got some big players, and these big players have got big revenues. So Novartis in 2014 was the highest revenue, $51 billion, so huge amounts of money. So most of these companies will have probably about 100,000 employees worldwide, so a pretty big organisation. So we've got this sort of big money situation. So clearly marketing is incredibly important to support all of this, because if the marketing strategy doesn't work, you can have the best drug in the world, and if you don't market it correctly, it's not going to sell. You're not going to get it to patients. We can think about how these companies have developed to generate these revenues. And I mean, so this information is taken from a textbook on marketing in pharma industry, and there are several books on marketing and business in the pharma industry, which are really quite good. So there's a reference to this on a couple of pages' time. It's available in the library, and there are also some online resources for this. So the pharma industry has seen growth, and the drivers for growth are given here. I mean, I suppose if we go back to the early 80s and even before that into the 70s, we can think about the earliest blockbuster drugs being developed. So we can think about things like statins and beta blockers being developed. And this was one of the real gateways for drug companies to say, right, we can make serious money here, because here is a drug that we can give to an individual for the rest of their life. So that's going to make serious money for us. So things like drugs targeting cardiovascular disease, heart attack, heart disease, stuff like that, to lower blood pressure. And again, as I sort of alluded to with a slightly personal view on Monday and Tuesday, the fact that we've got these drugs which are sold to people that can be used to treat illnesses which are lifestyle related predominantly. So things like heart disease, which can alternatively be treated using non-drugs, so behavioural changes. But anyway. So in the early 80s, we had these innovations in terms of new drugs for new product areas in terms of cardiovascular, and then starting to build into newer drugs for things like oncology. In the late 80s, we saw a massive price increase of many drugs, and part of this was driven by global economies, and part of this was driven by the fact that pharma companies needed to increase their prices in order to drive further innovation. In the early 90s, there was a lot of consolidation. So in the early 90s, a lot of the big drug companies merged. So this is the era when GSK was formed from its constituent parts, and various other companies consolidated. And there was general cost reduction at that stage. So the field had got too big, and therefore it sort of contracted in on itself in terms of the number of people employed and the number of companies. And then from the late 90s to the present day, we've got a renewed period of innovation. And this really is being driven partially by technology, so high-throughput technologies and computational approaches, partially being driven by new markets. So we're thinking about the fact that the USA was traditionally a very big market for drugs. It still is, but we've got a lot of emerging markets. So markets like India and China are growing very, very quickly as there's additional wealth in these places. Markets like Latin America, South America, and other parts of Europe, perhaps, where there's an increase in market size. And in addition, this innovation has been driven by the fact that patients want more. Patients want more of their drugs. I don't mean they want more drugs, but they want more from their drugs. So they want better drugs that treat disease better. They want drugs which treat new diseases. So we've got this technology-driven targeting of things like autoimmune disease and oncology from biologic therapies. So we've got this innovation coming through here, and it means that drug companies are now able to offer something new, and that has a better chance of being sold. So, in the light of all this, we can think about how we might market pharmaceuticals. And the two references here are, so the marketing mix and 4 Ps. So the marketing mix is a marketing model, if you like, which is used to describe factors which are important for marketing. And the original version of this was in the 50s and 60s. So it was described by early American marketers in the 50s and 60s. And then it was sort of crystallized into these 4 Ps, which we'll talk about. It's since expanded, so people keep adding to it. So if you come up with a model that works nicely and it's got different categories, people will keep adding categories until it becomes a little more unwieldy. We'll stick with the 4 Ps. So there's a good marketing guide for engineers, which is available on Novell, which is an online resource. So on a university computer, if you go to novell.com and search for demystifying marketing, you'll be able to find that, and it's full text searchable, and it's as a PDF. And then the book on pharmaceutical marketing is Dogrammatis 2002, so there's a copy of that in the library, and that is very useful as well. So, the marketing mix describes the variables that we have to work with in terms of our marketing our product, and the four Ps, so the 4 categories that were sort of suggested in the original iteration of the idea of a marketing mix are product, place, price, and promotion. And we'll sort of go through these in turn. So when thinking about marketing, one needs to think about all of these things. Now, some of these will be fairly intuitive, and some of these will be slightly more complex. Some of these will be slightly more something that you might not have thought about so much. You might have not think, well, actually, is this marketing? So first of all, product. So product is at the top, and product is usually thought about first, because it's probably one of the most important areas. So the product here, the product refers to the features of the product, the attributes of the product. So what is the product, and what does it do, and what is it like? And the product here can be an object or a service or even an idea. So the product is something you are selling, but it doesn't have to be a tablet. It could be a service, so it could be a pharmaceutical service, so it could be the idea of personalized medicine. It could be an idea, so the concept of personalized medicine or stratified medicine. So it could just be this idea, and it still would need marketing in order to bring it to the general populace and bring it to fruition. So when we think of the product, we can think of the product in a number of different ways. Now, the next few slides, we've got some sort of the concepts related to the product category in terms of pharmaceuticals. So the first of these areas is the benefits of the product. So this is what we've got here. So we've got our core benefit at the bottom, and our core benefit is kind of the crux of it. So the core benefit is the most basic thing that the product will do for us. And that can be split down and sort of stratified into 4 categories. So we have our generic product, our expected attributes, our augmented attributes, and our potential attributes. And this is sort of a sliding scale. So, each of these types of attributes can also be split down into emotional, logical, or physical. So physical is, it's a tablet, it's physically a tablet. Logical is, I will think about this and I will think about the tablet and I think the tablet will make me better. And then emotional is, I feel happy when I take the tablet or something like that. But not all of these attributes don't actually have to be a physicality. They can be something you think about. They can be a way that the product makes you feel. So we can think about these, again, if we go back to tech, if we go back to mobile phones, and we can think about these attributes for a mobile phone. So our generic product is the base level. Our generic product is the thing that we expect all of the products in the area to be able to do. So for a mobile phone, that would be our inherent product features. So it has a screen, it makes phone calls, it can send texts, because that at the base level is your standard generic product features. So that is what is absolutely required and expected. Our expected features, or expected attributes, are product features that the consumer expects, but might not always be present. So this would be something, if you're buying a mobile phone, you expect to be buying a mobile phone with these features. They're not the generic features, because they're over and above the generic features, which are making a phone call or sending a text. But they're stuff that the consumer expects. So at the moment, that would probably be, you'd be able to connect to Wi-Fi, it would be a 4G network, you could run apps quickly, it would have a fast processor. So those are the sort of things that you expect as a consumer. Our augmented attributes are the other side of that. So our augmented attributes can kind of be seen as the surprise and delight element, where the company, the manufacturer, is providing features or benefits to make the product more appealing. So this is stuff that you will look down, you'll be choosing a mobile phone and you'll say, oh, I'm impressed that that model has got these attributes. So that would be things like a free music subscription, free apps, free case, an improved camera, better product features than you thought would be practicable. And then our potential attributes are how good could this product be in the future? And by that, we mean how good could this physical product be in the future? So what we mean by that is, how will the company support this product? How will the company make sure that I am happy with this product in a year's time? So things like updates, upgrades, and sort of features like that. So if we turn this down to drugs, to pharmaceuticals, and here we've got some ideas that are related to over-the-counter medicines, because over-the-counter medicines are slightly more easy to conceptualize in terms of product features. And if we think about painkillers, we can map these sort of attributes to painkillers. So our generic product for a painkiller is, it treats the symptoms and it's a tablet. So those are our generic features, and that's what we'd expect as a kind of base level. Our expected attributes would be, it's easy to swallow and it has rapid pain relief, so those are the things we would like it to have, although not every product would have those features. Our augmented features would be that there would be lesser side effects, faster acting, improved packaging, easier to take. So these are the things that the company would try and push on you. These are the things that the company would try and surprise and delight you with. And then our potential, I mean, I've kind of got some question marks there, because I found it quite difficult to sort of think about what this might be. So how good could the product be in the future? Now, obviously, if you buy a packet of pills, buy a packet of tablets, that is as good as it's going to get. But I suppose the potential could well be, how could it be developed in the future? How could it give rise to an improved product in the future? Because another feature of the potential attributes of a product are, how is it going to improve as we go along? So we can potentially think of this as the next generation. So if we think about some actual products in the market, we can perhaps think about products that you could buy. So we've got potentially here some fairly generic products, so paracetamol. So Galpharm is a company, a contract manufacturer, and you can buy those paracetamol tablets from Sainsbury's or Aldi or wherever. So those are just about the cheapest you can buy, so they're fairly generic. Panadol is the GSK brand, they are more expensive. So those are the kind of basic products, and then we've got some more expensive products at the top. So these are roughly about twice as expensive as the baseline product. So we've got an extra advance and we've got an Actifast. So we've got one which has got caffeine in it, so the red one has got caffeine in, so it fights your pain and also makes you stay awake. And then Actifast is a faster absorbing tablet, it's meant to be. So these are our augmented products. So these are our augmented product features. So the fact it's non-drowsy, the fact that it's going to be quicker to absorb. So the second area around the products that we want to just talk about quickly is the fact that there is a desire for more as time goes on. So people get more and more demanding of their products. So again, we can think about mobile phones. So 10 years ago, mobile phones, you were happy if your mobile phone allowed you to make a phone call, allowed you to text someone, had one or two games. Now, of course, you buy a mobile phone, you expect it to be able to do absolutely everything. You expect it to be able to be a computer in your pocket, which most of them are now. And it's exactly the same for pharma. So if we go back 30 or 40 years, we could say, right, I want a pill to lower my blood pressure. So if you go back to America in the 50s and 60s, a lot of people with cardiovascular disease, heart disease, saying, I really want to be able to control my blood pressure. And when the pharma companies came along and said, right, we have this product, we have these statin products, we can control your blood pressure for you, they would be delighted because that's something brand new. Now, we are a lot more picky. Now we want all these things as well. So we want to be thinking about various other aspects of the drug product. So we want an efficacious and safe drug. So we think about safety and efficacy of drugs more now. We're more informed, certainly people in this room, but also the general population. We want a good administration pathway. So we want a tablet which is easy to swallow. Previously, we'd be happy with any sort of tablet. So we'd be happy with a big tablet that would be hard to swallow if it treated the illness. Now we want a small tablet that's easy to swallow. We want to know how to manage our illnesses. So we want some support from the company as well. So we want the company to give us treatment guidelines. Ideally, we'd like drugs that are able to prevent diseases. So we want some sort of prevention. So we want drug companies to be responsible for that as well. We want the drug to be affordable. So we want it to be available for a cheap price. And again, in the UK, that really refers to over-the-counter. In the US, that will refer to prescription medication as well. And in addition, we kind of have ethical aspects now as well, because there's a lot of people have ideas about what pharma are like and if pharma are ethically active companies. So we want to think, well, we want our drug to be environmentally friendly. If we read a news report saying that drug companies are polluting the environment, we want to be sure that the drug we're taking is actually decent for the environment. It's not going to be polluting. And finally, we want to be asking the question, why can't everyone have my drug? So we're in a privileged position in Western Europe in that we can usually afford the drugs that we need. But what about people in India? What about people in Africa, in third world countries? And so we want this idea of ethics and universal access. So drug companies now are having to provide all of this. They're having to provide evidence that, yeah, they've got an efficacious and safe drug which is easy to use, which is in the product, that's fine, but also that they are environmentally sound and also that they're ethically sound. So they may well be giving drug away in certain countries. And a large number of drug companies do this. They prescribe drugs, they sell drugs in certain countries, and they will give large amounts of drug away to other countries. And we'll come back to this right at the end. So the final sort of area around products is, and this is again just something to think about, is the fact that the question of whether we are actually buying characteristics or benefits. So are we actually buying a drug? And again, we can think about over-the-counter and we can think about painkillers perhaps. So are we buying painkillers based on a characteristic or a benefit? So in terms of efficacy, are we thinking about drug efficacy, or have we just got a headache and we want to get rid of the headache? Are we thinking about the safety of the drug we're buying, or are we actually just wanting a drug without any side effects? Are we thinking about the dosage form it's in, or the amount we're taking a day, or are we just happy that it's convenient that we just take one in the morning rather than one every 4 hours? And indeed, if we're administering painkillers to children, if we have children, then are we happy that, do we really worry about the administrative route, or are we just happy that it's a syrup rather than a tablet because it's difficult to get children to take tablets? So most drugs developed this great brand loyalty based on benefits rather than characteristics. And it's similar in a lot of fields. So a lot of products that are marketed will be marketed on their benefits rather than their characteristics. So the fact it makes you feel better. So on the basis of this, just a quick sort of straw poll. How many people in the room are brand loyal when it comes to mobile phones? So how many people in this room have always bought the same mobile phone? Or would, if you've got an iPhone or something, then would buy another one? So there's a fair degree of brand loyalty. How many people are brand loyal when it comes to over-the-counter pharmaceuticals? So is anyone in the room, would anyone in the room only buy brand label pharmaceuticals? Sorry? Cheapest, right, okay. So a lot of people, some people would buy, who would always buy the cheapest? Right, okay. Would anyone in the room, is anyone in the room loyal to a brand for a certain thing? For a drug product? So for painkillers, for instance, antihistamines. Okay, so I mean, I think generally speaking, people are quite selective, and people are canny consumers. People are clever in the way they spend money. So yeah, there is this drive to spend less money. But my guess is that if there are a few more people in the room than this, if there are 100 people in the room, I guess there would be some people who would be brand loyal to pharmaceuticals for certain purposes, for example, painkillers or antacids or something like that. So, and that would be based on the characteristics. So I know people who swear by Nurofen. So if they've got a pain, they will take Nurofen, which is a painkiller, but it's a branded painkiller, and they won't buy anything else. And that's because of the benefit, the perceived benefit that comes from that product. And again, that's partially down to the marketing, because there are lots of adverts for Nurofen, but partially down to the characteristics and the benefits that it gives. Okay, so to sort of close out on the product, we've got these sort of core values in terms of the product. So we've got efficacy and safety and tolerability and speed of action and quality and cost. So these can be seen as the core values. These are inherent to the drug product themselves. And then we've kind of got these augmented values. So these are the things that the drug companies are trying to build into the products in order to persuade us to buy them. So ease of use and temperature stability and shelf life and so forth. So we've got all of this stuff which is kind of built around them. And many of these things, if you're buying a very cheap pharmaceutical, if you go to Aldi to get your paracetamol or whatever, they won't exist for that product because it's just paracetamol. Everyone knows how to use it and take it and all that. But the bigger companies, so to try and persuade you to buy Panadol rather than paracetamol, they will be doing all of these things. So there's branding and there are adverts and there's stuff on the company website and there's information. So there's a whole area around these products. Right, and I think we've kind of covered that. So the second of the areas in the marketing mix is place. So place is how the drug reaches the patients, and this is sort of surrounding the distribution, channel management, customer service, and so forth. So this also part of place is dealing with also supply chains into the company, but we won't worry about that too much. So in order to think about how drugs are distributed and managed, and obviously this is still going to be very highly regulated, we can think about how drugs actually get to the customer. And we've got this idea that the manufacturer will generally use a distributor. So they will generally use intermediaries. So each of these channels from manufacturer to customer is known as the channel of distribution. And it will be probably quite common for several manufacturers to use the same distributor. So distributors are incredibly important in the pharma industry. They're incredibly highly regulated as well, but they are used a great deal. And this is because there are fewer contacts for the pharmaceutical companies. So instead of the manufacturer having to sell to thousands of pharmacies and thousands of hospitals, there are far fewer contracts. So there will be a much more streamlined process for the pharma company. So this builds in efficiency and economy of scale, lower margins, and also things like warehouse licensing. So under good distribution practice, it makes a lot of sense if a distributor handles distribution for a number of pharma companies, because this will mean that the costs overall are greatly lowered. The difference between a distributor and a wholesaler, so a distributor will distribute pharmaceuticals for a fee. So they will charge the companies a fee in order to distribute their pharmaceuticals, whereas a wholesaler will buy and sell. So they buy the pharmaceuticals in and they sell them and they make a profit that way. So they make profit rather than taking a fee for their operations. And we also, of course, have to remember that in the distribution channel, we go from the manufacturer to the distributor to the customer. And if we're talking about, well, even if we're talking about over-the-counter, so if we buy our over-the-counter from a pharmacist, or if we are, if we're taking prescription medicines, we'd have a clinician, the physical product travels down to the customer. But in addition, there's a lot of information that travels. And again, this can be thought of in the place category, because it's still important for the customer. So the manufacturer will cascade information down to the distributor and the pharmacist and the doctors, the clinicians who are prescribing, and also the customer. And likewise, the pharmacist and the doctor will give information to the customer as well. So there's also this flow of information. And as we saw on the product line, in the product heading, customers, patients, do need a lot of information. They like to be supported. And this is the big part of marketing. It's not something you might think of as marketing, but if you have a medicine and the product information leaflet is good and easy to read, and if there's a website and you can go on the website and look about side effects and look about dosing, and if there's information on what happens if you accidentally miss a dose or whatever, then you feel supported. So it's a more positive experience, about as positive an experience as being ill can be. So in terms of place, we've got, again, a number of different sort of headings. We've got the idea of channel objectives, so this revolves around the speed, frequency and consistency of the channel, so how is the supply line structured, and how well can supply happen from the manufacturer to the consumer or the patient. And tied in with this, availability and condition of goods. Now obviously with pharmaceuticals, similar to a lot of things, you'll be very upset if the pharmaceuticals arrived to you in a bad state. And clearly this is highly regulated, and we have GDP in order to make sure that the pharmaceuticals arrive to you in a good state. So clearly this is something that the companies need to think about. And again, this is part of marketing. We've got channel structure, so this is more important for the company, this is more important for the pharma company in that if they can integrate channels together, they can save costs and they can save hassle. We've got this idea of trade barriers, and trade barriers come in, and this is a huge area, but and really it's sort of between marketing and economics and strategy here. Trade barriers are important when you've got multinational companies who need to move stuff around the world, because we have things like quotas coming into and out of countries. So at the moment, the EU is a free trade area. In a few years' time, we won't be part of that, possibly. So there will certainly be a big problem for pharma companies based in the UK or with UK operations, because every time they import or export stuff, then they're going to be paying quotas. So clearly that is something that needs to be dealt with. There's the idea of licensing and standards and customs and taxes, all barriers to trade, barriers to free movement of stuff around the world. Now, the large pharma companies rely upon a multinational approach, not only to R&D and not only to selling, but also manufacture. So you've got a company like GSK, they may well make a product in America, and then they will ship the bulk pharmaceutical ingredient to another country in order to be formulated. They may then ship the formulated products to another country to be packed. So there's this massive amount of movement. And again, that is part of the marketing, because if you don't understand the way in which the product comes to you from initial manufacture, then you can't really think about marketing it. And then we've got physical distribution, so methods of distribution, and there will be brokers and agents and tracking and various other things. So the whole logistical side is potentially really very complicated, because we need to make sure that everything is in the right place at the right time. An awful lot of industry, not just pharma, but also other sectors, operates on a just-in-time principle. So the fact that we will have relatively low stockpiles in any one place and products arrive when they are needed. Obviously, if there is a lack of products, then that's a big problem, because there needs to be a certain stockpile. If you go to the pharmacist and there's none of your product there, then you can't have it, and therefore that is a very negative thing. Okay, so the third heading is price, and price is a complex field in terms of marketing, because price price has a definition for us. So if we want to know the price of something, that is the amount of money that we spend on it. And that's what we all know by price. In a marketing perspective, price is referred to as the value attached to products or services. And the value is described as the buyer's perception on the worth of the product. So the value is equal to the perception of the benefits minus the acquisition cost. So clearly, there's a difference between price and value, because price is one thing, defined as one thing, and value is defined as a completely different thing. So, and then the profit is defined, and again, from a company point of view, profit is very important. So the profit is described as being generated when the selling price exceeds costs. Now, profit is a very contentious issue in pharma, because we will see in the news every year there will be companies posting profits, because that's what companies do. Big companies post their profits online to newspapers, and it will be reported in the press. And you'll say, right, okay, so the pharma company A has generated $500 million worth of profit this year. And this is ethically a very tricky field, because a certain percentage of the population will immediately turn around and say, right, they've generated a huge amount of profit, they're profiteering, they're making money out of sick people. Of course, the opposite argument there is that it covers development costs. So all of the costs that are required for developing new drugs need to be funded some way. So that, again, there is this sort of argument on both sides. And again, I'm not going to tell you what to think. We need to think about that ourselves. So in terms of the components of price in terms of the marketing mix, we can think about a number of different areas. So we can think about the characteristics of the price. So that is all of the factors which build into the price. So the price of goods and the price of manufacture and the price of marketing and the price of distribution and everything. So a marketer will not just see a headline number, they will see all of these components and becoming part of the price. We can see price as a comparable measure. So this is a way in which we can judge the value of something. So we know that Apple iPhones are very expensive. They're more expensive than an Android phone. So what does that actually mean to us? Part of it says, well, they're very expensive, I might not buy one. But part of it will say to us, well, it's expensive, therefore it's more quality product, so it's going to be a better product, so it's a better thing to have. So drug companies would love that. Drug companies would love it if you saw their expensive drug and you said, well, it's an expensive drug, so therefore it's going to be far better for me. It's going to be better. So again, we've got this signal of quality and value. Price can be a competitive weapon. So price can be a really decisive factor in when two companies are fighting for a market. So if you decrease the price in order to make better sales, you can undercut your rivals. It may well be that you'll be selling product for a lower price than cost, but it does mean that you will undercut your rivals. Now, this area of competition sort of goes into game theory. So large corporations have to make sure that they don't put each other out of business, generally speaking. So if the top three pharma companies decided that they wanted to try and put each other out of business, then that would be a very bad thing, because a lot of people rely on the products of those companies. So, and there'll be massive knock-on effects if suddenly Novartis went under. If suddenly they went bust, that would be a massive problem, because the dynamics of the sector, the economics of the sector would go crazy. There'd be a lot of people who would need drugs. Everything would be IP protected, so no one else could make the drugs. The whole area would kind of go a bit mad. So game theory suggests that companies can compete with each other in order to make money, but the objective is not to put each other out of business. So the objective is not to make too much more money than your competitors so that they would actually be damaged. So the use of price as a competitive weapon is taken very seriously, and it's an area where there are lots of theorists and strategists who work on this in order to try and look at pricing. And this is a key part of when one prices a drug, what one thinks about when a price is set for a drug, because obviously it will affect the sales volume. Pricing is an immensely complicated and a very, very intricate area, and there's plenty of text out there on drug pricing, so we're not really going to discuss it too much more. But as I mentioned earlier, customers see price as a number, marketers see it as multiple aspects which refer to attributes of the product. So as I kind of alluded to, price setting in the pharmaceutical industry has a number of considerations which are very industry specific. Because obviously the patient will probably not be paying for the product. If we're talking about prescribed medicines, the patient won't pay for the product, certainly in the UK, in Europe. In the US, they won't really either, because they will be going through an insurance scheme, but it will be probably go through an insurance scheme, but it's a slightly different dynamic in the US. More so than probably any other sector, we've got this battle between activists and politicians who are always complaining. So there are always complaints about drug pricing. If you go online, if you go to the Guardian website, there will be weekly news stories about people complaining about the price of drugs. It's just something that happens. It will be patients complaining. It will be relatives of patients who can't afford a treatment. It will be patients who can't use a drug in the UK because it's not been approved. It will be politicians saying that drug companies make too much money. It will be activist groups saying that drug companies make too much money. Probably more so than any other industry I can think of. So we've got all of this stuff going on around it as well. Patients expect the best possible treatment irrespective of cost. So a key factor in most of these stories, most of these personal stories in the news, is that patients expect to be treated and expect to be made well, because the final point is, how do you set a price on health? How do you set a price on treatment? So it's a very, very multi-level problem. So the final thing on price is just kind of breaking down. So we've got pricing objectives in terms of competition, in terms of the product and brand image. So the idea that you don't want to set a price too low, otherwise it will damage your brand. So if suddenly Apple released a new iPhone tomorrow and it was £200, everyone would be very happy, I'm sure, but it would damage the brand, because Apple is seen as a premium product. So it will be a very counterintuitive thing to do. And clearly we also have to satisfy stakeholders and shareholders, because these are companies we're talking about. We've got customer demands, so customer perceptions and changes to demand over time. So pricing is a very flexible and fluid thing. And then we've got competitor pricing. And this sort of goes into the cost and price structure. We're not going to discuss that at all here, because again, that is another huge area. And potential discounting as well. So discounting is used sometimes for ethical reasons, sometimes for advertisement reasons almost, and marketing reasons, for promotion reasons. Sometimes it's used in order that drug companies and government bodies or insurance companies can work together in order to provide treatment. So I'll talk about that in a sort of case study right at the end. So another sort of question here. So if you are brand loyal to your mobile phone, so if you only have an Apple, or if you only have a Samsung or whatever, how much does the price determine your choice? So as I mentioned, yeah, Apple is seen as a sort of premium product. How much does the price of the phone actually determine your choice to buy that brand? Because I know there are certain sectors where price is a very, very important choice. I mean, things like watches. So many watches are used sort of utility, but there is a huge number of companies who make watches where the price is more or less the most important thing, because it's not the low price, it's the higher prices. So watches as a symbol of status. And I suppose the linked question here is, what would make you switch to a generic? So is there anything, if you're an Apple iPhone user, you've always had an iPhone, you're very loyal to the brand, what would actually make you switch to a generic brand? Would there be, if it changed price, if all of a sudden there were far better features, if the generic brand, if the Samsung was suddenly a lot more like an Apple product? So we can perhaps think about these. And in terms of drugs, so if you use a brand name over-the-counter drug, how much does the price determine your choice, and what will make you switch to a generic? Now, it sounds like most people in the room are already at the generic level. Most people here are just taking whatever is cheapest. But if we had 1,000 people, I'm guessing there will be some people who would say, well, I use Nurofen for pain relief, and I would never try anything else. I would never use anything else. No matter if it was free, I would still use Nurofen. So we can perhaps think about this as well. Okay, so the fourth of the areas, the fourth of the P's is promotion. So promotion refers to the integrated communications program a pharmaceutical company follows in order to reach its target market. So this is advertising. This is what one often just thinks about marketing as. So if you think about marketing, you think, well, it's the way in which adverts happen and it's the way in which we get promoted. So we have classical advertising, obviously in the UK, in most countries, advertising on print media, on the radio, on the TV is limited to over the counter. So it doesn't happen for prescribed products. Personal selling. So personal selling is a very important aspect of pharmaceutical marketing and promotion, where people go out and speak to prescribers, speak to opinion makers, speak to doctors and pharmacists. So this is a big role of pharmaceutical reps. They go out and take the message person to person. PR, and we'll talk a bit about PR in a bit, and then internet promotion and social media. So there's more and more on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and various other things that you're probably all using and have never heard of, where drug companies are getting into the market, because it would be daft not to, because that is what a lot of people are now connecting with. So a lot of people connecting with social media, getting their information from social media rather than traditional outlets, rather than watching ITV or reading the papers. So there are all of these different routes. As with many other industries, a great deal of effort goes into identifying customer needs. And this is through things like market research, but this is also through things like intelligence, so drug market intelligence. This is things like reports from MHRA or FDA and companies responding to areas like that. It's about talking through the personal selling. It's about the reps talking to clinicians, talking to GPs, talking to hospitals, talking to opinion makers and getting an idea about the needs of the customer, the needs of the patient. So successful communication efforts are required between manufacturer, prescriber and the customer. But of course in the UK, the patient often, certainly for prescribed medicines, the patient won't have any say in the matter. The patient will be completely out of this because they are not going to be looking and trying to decide what drug to take, because the doctor is going to be doing that. So in order to get to this prescription, so in the UK, the key point for the pharmaceutical industry is the top prescription. So your doctor, you go to the doctor and you say, I've got this illness, and your doctor says, yes, I would recommend using an antiviral, let's say, and I will prescribe this because I believe this is the best antiviral. So how do you get to that point? How do you get from a position of brand ignorance, where your GP would prescribe you a generic product? How does the company get in and saying, yes, we will now get the GPs in the UK prescribing our product because we believe it's the best, and we're going to persuade the GPs to do that as well. So we go through this sort of cascade, and this is a fairly standard marketing cascade, and we can perhaps think about this in terms of anything one will buy. So we start out from a position of brand ignorance. So I've never heard of something. We're aware of it, so we're sort of, it's there, but we're not really, we don't know much about it. Then we start to know about it, then we start to like it, then we start to prefer it, and then we prefer it so much we are convinced we're going to use it, and then we get to the stage of prescription. Now, clearly, each of these stages for, let's say, something like a new chocolate bar, if we're going out and buying a chocolate bar, that is a fairly trivial decision. So we wouldn't know anything about it, and then we'd be aware of it, we'd see it in the shops, we'd know about it. We'd talk to someone and say, oh, you had one, and they'd say, yeah, it's all right. Then we'd try it, and we might like it, and then hopefully Cadbury's would hope that the chocolate bar will be your favourite chocolate bar and you always have it. But clearly, those are fairly minor issues. Those are fairly minor choices that we have. For a doctor, for a GP, to go from being brand ignorant to actually prescribing a drug to their patients is a bit of a bigger ask. So how do drug companies actually do this? Well, they use what's called the pyramid of influence. So instead of a drug company trying to access thousands and thousands of general practitioners, they will get in at the top. So if we think about, this is kind of the pyramid of our health system. Our GPs are along the bottom, and these are the people who you go to see when you go and see the doctor. Above that are the specialists in hospitals, so there are far fewer of those. Above that, we have hospital clinic directors. There are far fewer of those. And at the top, we have our opinion leaders. So opinion leaders are potentially academics, professors of surgery, political positions, people high up in the NHS, people high up in policy organisations. They probably don't prescribe. They may not even see patients. They will have done at some point, so they will potentially have had a career in medicine, but now they're so high up in the management structure that they won't see patients anymore. But those are the people the drug companies are really interested in talking to and getting on board. Because if your opinion leader says, yes, this is a wonderful antiviral drug, they will talk to hospital clinic directors and it will trickle down. So this is the kind of the lobbying from the pharma companies is so strong that many of the opinion leaders will be involved at a very early stage in drug development. So they'll be involved during the clinical trial stage. So GSK or whoever may well speak to opinion leaders as the drug is passing through a clinical trial just to get it on the radar. And again, this is another reason why the companies on their websites will say, yes, we have 3 drugs in oncology at stage 1 and 5 drugs in oncology at stage 2. And at stage 3, we now have 6 drugs in oncology, 2 are for colorectal, 2 are for breast cancer, whatever. So for this reason, the opinion leaders are kept in the loop. So they will then be able, when the drug is approved, they will then be able to speak to everyone else and be able to speak to clinic directors, and it will trickle down, and the GPs will eventually hear, yes, we've got these new drugs. So the kind of the components of promotion, so we have to think about promotion objectives, so to inform, to persuade, and to remind. And with a lot of this, I think the best way to sort of get your head around all of this is just to think of all these areas in terms of products we buy every day and think about, well, what advertising are we seeing, what promotion are we seeing that informs us, that persuades us and reminds us something exists. About advertising, personal selling, as I mentioned, so pharma reps who not only sell but also uncover unmet needs, so provide clinical intelligence. PR, so public relations, so press and other PR, and also philanthropy. So philanthropy is a very powerful tool for pharma companies because it helps to provide an ethical angle. So if a pharma company says, right, this year we are spending £100 million on research in hospitals, in research labs, in projects, and we are giving this money away to do good research, and the research will be in the public domain. That's a great marketing tool, because it shows the world that the company are interested in giving back. So it helps to balance the fact that the company perhaps has a lot of profit. If they're giving that profit to other people in order to help society, that is a good thing. And then sort of the idea of sales promotions at the end. So just a quick word about direct-to-consumer pharma advertising. So DTCA is when you have prescription drugs and you market them directly to people. And there are 2 countries in the world that do this, so the USA and New Zealand. I've not been to New Zealand, but certainly in the USA, when you switch the TV on, the advert breaks. A lot of the adverts are for prescription medicines. So a lot of the adverts will be 30 seconds on why we should be taking some latest prescription medicine. And it's something you can't buy. The adverts always say, ask your doctor about this. So the idea is, you watch TV, you think, well, yeah, I'm not terribly happy about this situation I've got. I'm not terribly happy about high blood pressure or whatever. I'm going to go and talk to my doctor. And instead of starting from a point of view and saying, I've got high blood pressure, what do you recommend? They would go in and say, I've got high blood pressure, I watch the TV, I think I should take this drug. Which is a very controversial thing, obviously. And it's been going on in the US for quite a long time. And there's a whole array of impacts around this. There's a nice review on this, which the reference is there. Because they've been shown to be lots of effects on drug use, so it changes the way in which drugs are used in those countries. It changes lifestyle. So if there's an advert on the TV saying, you can take this drug to lower your blood pressure, are individuals going to be less likely to have a healthy lifestyle? And it has a variety of other impacts as well. So it's a very controversial area. As I say, only 2 countries in the world do it. There have been attempts to introduce it into other countries as time went on, but it has been resisted so far. But if you're interested in this area, that's a good review to have a look at. Yeah, so, and clearly advertising doesn't affect your choice of over-the-counter drug because you just buy whatever's cheapest. But instead of these questions here, you might like to think about how advertising actually affects you. Because people are affected by advertising in different ways. Even if you're self-consciously saying, I do not listen to advertising, I'm going to ignore that advert, it does kind of get in there. So the fact that if you're on Facebook and there are adverts for things on Facebook, they are just kind of reminding you. They're sort of there out of your field of vision. You can't quite see them. You're trying to ignore them, but they're still there, and you will still notice them. Your brain notices them on a sort of subconscious level. So just to finish off, just thinking about future trends. So the factors that will influence marketing strategy over the coming years can be broadly grouped into 3 areas: so external influences, customer dynamics, and industry dynamics. So in terms of external influences, we've got things like demographic shift, so the fact we've got an ageing population, so clearly that is going to change the way marketing is done for drugs. Epidemiological changes, so changes in the epidemiology of disease. And clearly, again, that's going to change the way in which disease occurs, the prevalence of disease in different places, so that, therefore, it's going to affect the way in which drugs are developed and sold and therefore marketed. Change in geopolitics, so changes around the world, changes to different countries, perhaps different societies, different countries having a stronger or weaker economy. Emerging ethical issues, especially around personalised medicine, the idea of stem cells, the idea of ideas in that sort of area where there are new challenges to people's ethical thoughts. Changes to healthcare systems and cost containment. So at the moment there are big changes in the NHS going on. How are those going to affect drug purchasing power? How are those going to affect the way in which drugs are prescribed in the UK? We don't really know. Regulatory changes, and then things like Brexit. So we've got the European Medicines Agency in the UK at the moment. There's fairly close links between the HMRA and the European Medicine Agency, the EMA. The EMA are going to Amsterdam in a few years' time. So how is that going to change the climate? How is it going to change it when export quotas are needed for and export limits are put on things leaving this country? So that is a good example of an external influence, which is going to change the way in which the pharma industry are going to have to operate and also market. Because marketing is such an integral part of the pharma industry, any changes to any part of the pharma industry are going to affect the area. In terms of customer dynamics, we've got things like more health consciousness. So people now are more health conscious than in previous years, and that is both a good and bad thing for the pharma industry. So people are more aware of illness, but people will also perhaps have a greater propensity to want natural remedies, to want lifestyle-based remedies. They won't necessarily want to be using quote-unquote chemicals in order to improve their health. There's a more knowledgeable and increasingly sophisticated consumer base. There are social changes, so changes in work habits, changes in society, changes in exercise, stuff like that. There's this ongoing negative perception of big industry because of things like profit, because of things like competition, because of news articles. So there's a lot of information out there. And then patient support and customer campaign groups. So the idea that people get together and they try and change things. So things like prescribing drugs, choice of drugs that are prescribed in the UK and so forth. And then in terms of industry dynamics, we've got things like advances in tech, economic pressures, shortages of innovation, which we talked about on Tuesday in terms of drug development, company mergers, which we've talked about today, and then patents expiring, which hopefully we will be aware of. So this short window of time for actually monitorising the drug you're making. So just as a kind of closer, we've just got a couple of slides on ethics. So in contrast to many other industrial sectors, the pharma industry constantly receives criticism about its marketing activities. So in the UK, this seems to be mainly focused on NICE. So NICE is the organisation which controls whether a drug is prescribed in the UK or not. And most weeks there are news stories about this in the papers. So you've just got an example here of a couple of examples here. Opdivo so this article is from a few months ago. So this is from April this year. So NICE did not approve the use of Opdivo. So this is a next-generation cancer therapeutic. It would cost between $66,000 and $75,000 per year per patient of quality life. So this is a huge amount of money. And again, we come back to the question, how much is health worth? How much is life worth? Which is a question which can't really be answered. So NICE have made the statement, we will not approve drugs that cost more than the threshold of £20,000 to £30,000 per year per person for quality of life. So clearly this was a bad story, because this is a story that says NICE have rejected this, the drug is too expensive. The company is making too much money, this is a bad situation, so Bristol Myers Squibb are in the wrong, clearly. That's one way of reading it. Of course, the other way of reading it would be that, well, that is a fair price for a drug which is very expensive to make, was very expensive to develop, was very expensive to get to market. So there are two sides to all of this. So hopefully by the end of this week, you'll be aware of why it's so expensive. It is still a huge amount of money, but so is that the end of the story? Well, no. Update from